Is it possible to predict suicide? To predict not just that it will happen, but exactly when it will happen? This is a research that the University of Nottingham, in combination with the universities of Amsterdam and Harvard, have been diving into. And they discovered something very interesting because as it turns out, there is a time frame in which people are more prone to actually act on their suicidal ideation. And their results are as follows. They found that in December, suicidal ideation is at its high point. Then in winter, as winter progresses, that doesn't get much worse, but there is no surge of actual attempts. However, in late spring and early summer, that is when people are more prone to actually act on that ideation and end their lives, or at least attempt to. Not only is it a matter of when in the year, but they also found that there is a window in the day when the risk is highest. And that window is between roughly 4 and 5 a.m. So between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And reading this as a psychologist and as a suicide expert, I find that very interesting because, yes, there are some ideas that the report gives on why this might be. But I ran that through the ship inside your head, the rational captain, the emotional first mate, and the instinctive deckhand. And what I found is that, yeah, this actually makes sense. So let's start with the suicidal ideation peaking in December. That is not really a surprise. December is the darkest month of the year, even though January is often bleakest. December is, especially in the Western world, full of cheer and joy, and you should be enjoying yourself. We just had Thanksgiving in the States, going on to Christmas, which is a big family deal, big deal to do with, it has a lot of expectations to it. So it's dark. There's a lot of stress, often from work as well. I mean, in retail, that's obvious because this is when retail peaks. Shops sell the most in December for the most part. But also a lot of companies close at the end of year. So many companies are expected to have an extra performance and peak at that very last month of the year. So what it comes down to is that you've got 3 weeks to do roughly 2 months of work. And that's more or less what's expected of you in a lot of companies. So there's a lot of pressure, both professionally and socially. And this is the darkest time of the year. The combination of these 3 factors put a lot of pressure, emotional pressure, but also logistical pressure on people. If you're already not feeling well, if you're already in a place where it gets dark and you're really wondering if life is still worth it, you have more difficulty with rational thinking, you have more difficulty with long-term planning. So the kind of logistics that is required to plan where you're going to celebrate, which holiday, with whom, and how to get there, and who to get what in terms of presents, and all this. This requires a lot of logistics. This requires a lot of planning on the part of your captain, your rational captain. But that part of our brain is the first to get affected by anxiety, depression, and the suicidal ideation. Then there's the emotional aspect of it, the social aspect. So the social part of your brain, first mate, they are under a lot of pressure to, get it right. Do I get the right presents? Will I get along with family? What will they be asking of me, especially when you're on not too good terms with your family? The idea of having to spend time with them is extremely stressful. And as both your captain and your first mate are stressed out, and both are already not fully functional because existing conditions like depression, anxiety, or just stress in general can be enough, that might lead to your deckhand, your survival instinct, to think this is too much. I can't handle this. We as a crew, as a ship, cannot handle this. We're going to sink. And I might as well be ahead of the curve and protect myself by going to a place where I can't sink. And this is where suicidal ideation comes from. When stress gets so high and tension gets so much that you can't handle it anymore, you don't know how to handle it anymore, that is the point where your brains make this weird twist and say, I don't want to go on like this. And that often leads to the conclusion that I don't want to go on at all. So, summarizing, the idea of suicidal ideation peaking in December, especially within the Western world, it would have been very surprising if it were different. December is for a lot of people the most stressful time of the year, and it all comes together, it all accumulates. But people don't act on that ideation at that time. Because what the research found is that the majority of the attempts are actually between April and early June. So how does that work? Because that is in the middle of spring, and you'd expect, the weather is getting better. It's because again, we're talking about the northern hemisphere here, so it's springtime, it's nearly summer, it's getting warmer, there's more daylight, people can go out more, can do more. Surely that will make people feel better. The research mentions that might be explained by the fact that because of all these reasons, people have more energy and are therefore more likely and have more brain space to actually act on that suicidal ideation. And that is a fair presumption to make. It's a fair conclusion to draw. There's also another factor that I found from experience, both professional and from my personal experience, is that suicidal ideation takes time. Especially when the cause of it is stress. Stress needs to compound far enough before you reach that breaking point. So what happens is that you have this peak of suicidal ideation in December. And then the stress lowers a bit when you go into January, fresh start of the year, new things. Sure, it's still dark, but all those social pressures are gone. So you feel a little relief of that stress. But because you are so stressed, you still respond to every new trigger that happens. Because life goes on, and life is full of triggers, whether we like it or not. But when you are in a place of mind where you can't handle triggers well enough, because you don't have the ability to see things in perspective, because your captain's already switching on and off, so you can't plan very well, you don't know how to solve problems, because that's also part of your problem solving abilities. So you're already in a vulnerable position. And then as time goes on, as the months drag on, that is when it builds and it builds and it stacks up to a point where you just can't take it anymore. And your instinct says, I'm done. I'm not having this. I'm acting. And the only way I know how to do anything now is to protect us. To protect your life, the only way that you can do is be in a place where your life is no longer threatened. And the only place where your life is no longer threatened is, ironically, when there's nothing left to threaten. And to your instinct, which has no idea of consequences, that is a very logical step to make. So, in a way, it makes sense that it takes time for that ideation to take hold and become so strong that it turns into the compulsion to act. And that would make sense that, 4-5 months later, that is when people reach that breaking point. Because people are typically extremely resilient. You can take months or even years of this. But there comes a breaking point. There comes a point where you just can't take any more. And because there is more energy, because people go out more, because there is more brain space, more light, more literally more space and opportunity to act, yeah, it makes sense that it's around May that people actually make an attempt, actually do something. Now, what about that time frame in the middle of the night? The research paper gives no explanation for that per se, but really looking from a psychological perspective, that's not very surprising. It's been known for ages, literally centuries, that the time between 4 and 6 a.m. is the true lee in energy. That's the darkest time, just before the dawn. That is the hardest shift for people who are on a night shift. It's often called, even in sailing, it's called the dog's watch. It is a point where your body is at a chemical low. So in your hormonal changes that you have throughout the day, everyone has those reach a low around 4 to 5 a.m. At this time, it is dark. There's literally no light to be seen. Even in summer, at this time, everyone else is asleep. There is no one else. There's very little activity. You don't hear anyone outside. You don't sense activity. A lot of people are not aware of this, but we sense when there is a living thing around you. And when there's no one around, you feel the loneliness. And when you're already feeling alone and scared and have these dark thoughts, you already have trouble sleeping, because one of the symptoms of both anxiety, depression, and suicidality is a broken sleep rhythm. And a lot of people either sleep early in the night and wake up around 4, or they can't find sleep at all and are still awake around 4. So it's dark, you're sleep deprived, you're alone, there's no one around. And if there ever is a moment in time, a moment in the day where you feel completely abandoned and cut off from the world, it's around 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning. So yes, it makes absolute sense that this is the time when people feel the urge to hurt themselves strongest. Can you actually do something about that? These are biochemical things, especially the day-night cycle is a biochemical thing. If you find yourself awake in the middle of the night, talk to your doctor about what can be done. Medication can help you rebuild your resilience, your mental resilience, to get out of that dark hole, because that's going to be so much more difficult when you're sleep deprived. That's going to be so much more difficult when you're already feeling very, very low. And what medication does is it helps to regulate the biochemical aspect of suicidality. And that can help. As for the changes throughout the month, be aware of it. It's very hard to say when that exact cycle will hit an individual, because these are statistics. It is an average. There is no way of using this to truly predict someone else's behavior, or to truly predict your own behavior. But when you are aware of these kinds of trends, you can ask. If you have a loved one who suffers from suicidality, ask them if they are awake in the middle of the night. Give them the option to call you or to call someone. When you know that someone is suffering from suicidal ideation throughout December, keep a close eye on them. Know that they may not do something now, but they may down the line when you are no longer expecting it. But the fact that you are aware of these things, you are aware of these patterns, means that you can recognize them. You can't recognize what you don't know exists. So when you know of these patterns, you know what to look out for, you know what to ask, and you know that yes, you are not, if this is you, you are not the only one who's suffering from this. You're not the only one who's suffering through this. That's it for today, and I hope to see you again very soon in a new video.